What if I told you that one of the greatest warriors in Islamic history started out as just a teenager with a bow in his hand and no experience? Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas went from being an ordinary boy in Makkah to the most legendary archer of the Prophet's army. But it wasn't strength, speed, or even talent that made him great. It was a hidden secret that changed everything. And today you're about to discover it. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, may Allah be pleased with him, stands as one of history's most legendary archers. His mastery with the bow was absolute. Every arrow he released found its mark with deadly precision. This extraordinary skill required not only exceptional hand-eye coordination and muscular strength, but an almost supernatural level of concentration that would prove decisive in the most critical moments of early Islamic history. During the Battle of Uhud, when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, found himself in the most desperate of circumstances, Sa'd's archery would become the thin line between victory and catastrophe. The Muslim forces had been overwhelmed, scattered across the battlefield. The Prophet himself had sustained severe injuries. His right shoulder bore the brutal impact of an enemy sword, a wound so deep that he would feel its pain for an entire month. Blood streamed from his noble forehead, and one of his teeth had been shattered in the fierce combat. In this moment of crisis, Talha ibn Ubaidullah, a companion whose heroism had been chronicled in previous accounts, came to the Prophet's aid. Supporting and carrying the wounded Prophet, Talha helped him ascend to higher ground on the hillside. But even from this elevated position, the situation remained dire. The Prophet found himself with no more than 10 loyal companions by his side. Arrayed against this small band was Khalid ibn Walid's cavalry, 200 mounted warriors whose appearance on the battlefield was nothing short of terrifying. These were not ordinary horsemen. From head to hoof, their horses were encased in iron armor, transforming each mount into what could only be described as the ancient equivalent of a modern battle tank. The riders themselves were similarly protected, their bodies completely sheathed in steel from crown to heel. Such comprehensive armor made these warriors nearly invulnerable to conventional attacks. Simple sword strikes would prove utterly ineffective against such protection. Only a warrior with exceptional skill could identify and exploit the minute vulnerabilities in their armor, and Saad possessed exactly such expertise. Behind Khalid's cavalry, an even larger force approached, over 2,700 Quraysh warriors advancing with murderous intent toward the Prophet's position. The situation had reached its most critical point. Hamza, the Prophet's beloved uncle and one of Islam's greatest champions, lay dead among many other prominent Muslim leaders. Some fighters had already abandoned the battlefield entirely, leaving the remaining defenders in an almost hopeless position. As thousands of enemy warriors prepared for their final assault against the Prophet, two extraordinary events would unfold that would turn the tide of battle, and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas would be central to both. The first intervention came when the Prophet, recognizing the desperate nature of their situation, called upon his master archer. "O Saad," the Prophet commanded, "take aim and loose your arrows." The initial target was Khalid ibn Walid's 200-strong cavalry unit, those iron-clad warriors whose armor seemed to render them invincible. As previously established, mounted warriors of this era presented an almost impossible target. Their thick iron armor deflected most projectiles, and only the most precise shots to unprotected areas could prove fatal. Such accuracy demanded not only exceptional skill, but an almost preternatural ability to identify the tiny gaps in their protection. Saad later recounted this pivotal moment. I heard the Prophet address me with words that filled my heart with determination. In a hadith recorded by Bukhari, the Prophet declared, "Ya Saad, irmi fidaka ummi abi wa ummi." O Saad, I make my father and mother ransom for you, so shoot your arrows. This particular expression held profound significance in Arab culture. When someone declared their parents as ransom for another, it represented the highest possible honor, placing that person's value above even one's own father and mother. Saad later reflected on this moment. These words ignited a fire of motivation within me, for never before had the Prophet combined mention of both his father and mother in honoring anyone except me. What followed demonstrated Saad's truly extraordinary abilities as an archer. While many archers could manage a single arrow with reasonable accuracy, and skilled marksmen might handle 2 arrows simultaneously, Saad possessed a rare talent that set him apart from all others. He could draw and release 3 arrows in a single motion, each targeting a different enemy with devastating precision. Historical accounts describe this remarkable technique in vivid detail. Saad would nock 3 arrows simultaneously, draw his bowstring to full extension, and release all 3 projectiles in one fluid movement toward 3 separate targets. This was not random shooting. Each arrow was deliberately aimed at a specific enemy warrior. As Saad began his counterattack, he employed this 3-arrow technique with lethal efficiency. Drawing 3 arrows, he took careful aim at 3 members of Khalid's cavalry and released. Despite their comprehensive armor protection, all 3 enemies fell instantly dead. One arrow found its mark through an eye slit, another penetrated a gap in the armor plating, and the third struck an unprotected point with fatal precision. 3 armored warriors who moments before had seemed invincible now lay motionless on the battlefield. "Shoot again, O Saad," the Prophet commanded. The psychological effect on the remaining cavalry was immediate and profound. The death of 3 heavily armored warriors in a single volley caused the advancing 200-man unit to halt their charge and slow their approach dramatically. Fear began to creep into their ranks. Saad drew another 3 arrows and released them with the same devastating accuracy. 3 more enemy warriors crashed to the ground, dead before they could even cry out. By the time Saad had released 9 arrows, 9 of Khalid's elite cavalry lay dead, and crucially, each death had been instantaneous. The manner of these deaths was particularly significant. Typically, even arrows that managed to penetrate armor would only wound their targets, allowing the wounded warriors to continue fighting or at least retreat. But Saad's arrows killed immediately upon impact, causing the struck warriors to topple lifeless from their mounts. The surviving cavalry recognized the extraordinary nature of what they were witnessing. This was not merely skilled archery. This was archery of an almost supernatural caliber. Saad later described one particularly miraculous aspect of his shooting during this battle. Such was the blessing of Allah upon the Prophet's command that I was given arrows by the Prophet himself, including arrows that had no sharpened points whatsoever. These arrows were completely blunt, lacking the typical pointed tips that archers relied upon for penetration. Yet, when I released these blunt arrows in obedience to the Prophet's command, they still struck down the enemy warriors, killing them instantly. This account defies conventional understanding of archery and warfare, yet it illustrates the extraordinary divine assistance that accompanied the Muslim forces during their most desperate moments. Through Saad's archery, approximately 10 to 15 members of Khalid's cavalry were killed, forcing the entire 200-man unit to halt their advance rather than risk total annihilation. However, the larger Quraysh force, over 2,000 warriors, remained unaware of the cavalry's predicament. Approaching from behind, they had not witnessed the devastating effectiveness of Sa'd's arrows and continued their advance toward the Prophet's position. It was at this critical moment that the second extraordinary event unfolded, an event that would demonstrate the Prophet's own formidable combat abilities and fulfill a prophetic statement made years earlier. Among the advancing Quraysh forces was a prominent tribal leader. Historical sources suggest this was Jubair ibn Mut'im, though accounts vary on the exact identity. What remains consistent across all historical narratives is that this individual had made a specific threat against the Prophet during their time in Mecca. This warrior had been known for his pride in his military prowess and his mounted combat skills. During the pre-Islamic period in Mecca, he had frequently taunted the Prophet, saying, "Do you see this horse of mine? I am a master of warfare, and I will kill you with this very horse." The Prophet's response had been both calm and prophetic. "Yes, I see your horse. But if Allah wills, I will be the one to kill you upon it." Now, at the Battle of Uhud, this prophecy was about to be fulfilled. As the Quraysh forces prepared for their final assault, with this particular leader motivating and directing the attack, the Prophet turned to Ali ibn Abi Talib with a specific request. "Give me your spear, Ali," the Prophet commanded. Ali immediately handed over his weapon, and what followed was recorded by Ali himself in a hadith preserved by Bukhari. According to Ali's eyewitness account, the Prophet took several steps backward, positioning himself for the throw. Then, with tremendous force, he hurled the spear toward the enemy leader. The power of the Prophet's throw was so great that all of us, myself and the other companions standing near the Prophet, were knocked off balance by the force of his movement. The spear flew across the battlefield with remarkable accuracy, seeking its target among the enemy ranks. The intended victim was completely encased in armor from head to foot, presenting what appeared to be an impenetrable defense. Yet, by divine providence, there existed a single vulnerable point in his protection. At the junction where his iron helmet met his armored breastplate, a small gap had been created, barely more than a finger's width. This tiny space, bridged only by leather strapping and cloth padding, represented the only point where his armor did not provide complete protection. The Prophet's spear found this exact spot with supernatural precision. The spear penetrated the gap and tore through the soft tissue of the man's neck, creating a severe wound that immediately began bleeding profusely. The impact knocked him from his horse, and he crashed to the ground in terror and pain. "Muhammad has killed me," he cried out in anguish and fear. His fellow warriors rushed to his aid, examining the wound and attempting to reassure him. "You are fine," they insisted. "It is merely a small cut on your neck. The wound is not fatal." But the injured man was consumed by terror, his voice filled with prophetic dread. "No, you do not understand. If Muhammad were to blow upon me now, I would die instantly." Such was his overwhelming fear of the Prophet that he believed even the gentlest breath from Muhammad would prove fatal given his current condition. This warrior managed to return to Mecca, but the prophecy would indeed be fulfilled. The wound, though seemingly minor, became severely infected and swollen. The man died from complications arising from the Prophet's spear throw, exactly as had been foretold years earlier in Mecca. The psychological impact of this event on the remaining Quraysh forces was devastating. Witnessing their leader struck down by what appeared to be an impossible throw, and seeing Khalid's elite cavalry decimated by Sa'd's supernatural archery, the enemy forces lost their will to continue the assault. Rather than press their numerical advantage, they chose to withdraw, leaving the Prophet and his small band of companions safe from annihilation. Thus, through these two extraordinary interventions, Sa'd's masterful archery and the Prophet's precisely thrown spear, the Muslim forces survived their darkest hour at the Battle of Uhud. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas had played a crucial role in preventing what could have been the complete destruction of the early Muslim community. In another incident during the same battle, recorded by Imam Muslim in his collection on the virtues of the companions, Saad recounted, "There was a particular polytheist warrior who was wreaking havoc among our Muslim ranks, scattering our forces and causing great disruption. The Prophet commanded me, 'Shoot your arrows, O Saad, may my father and mother be your ransom.'" Saad continued, "I took an arrow that completely lacked a sharpened point. It had no arrowhead whatsoever. In that era, arrows were typically crafted with carefully sharpened metal points designed for maximum penetration. This arrow had nothing of the sort. It was entirely blunt. Despite the weapon's apparent uselessness, Saad obeyed the Prophet's command without hesitation. I released the blunt arrow as instructed, and it struck the man directly in his forehead. He immediately fell dead from his horse. What occurred next added an element of divine humor to this moment of divine intervention. As the man fell from his mount, his clothing became disheveled, and his private parts were exposed. Upon witnessing this unexpected and somewhat comical turn of events, occurring in the midst of such serious warfare, the Prophet smiled and then laughed so heartily that his back teeth became visible. This incident demonstrates not only the miraculous nature of Sa'd's archery under divine blessing, but also the Prophet's human capacity for finding moments of lightness even during the gravest circumstances of battle. Sa'd's experiences at the Battle of Uhud extended beyond his archery prowess to include witnessing divine intervention firsthand. In a hadith recorded by both Bukhari in his Book of Military Expeditions and Muslim in his Book of Virtues, Sa'd provided testimony of supernatural assistance during the battle. "I saw the Messenger of Allah at the Battle of Uhud, accompanied by two men dressed in white garments, fighting fiercely in his defense," Saad reported. "I had never seen these two individuals before that day, nor did I ever see them again afterward." The renowned Islamic scholar Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar explained that these two mysterious warriors were the archangels Jibril, Gabriel, and Michael, Michael, as confirmed by testimony from other companions who witnessed the same supernatural assistance. This concludes the examination of Sa'd's role in the Battle of Uhud, the 10th of his many virtues and accomplishments. Previously discussed were his participation in the Prophet's military campaigns, Virtue 7, his unerring accuracy with the bow, Virtue 8, and his crucial role at the Battle of Badr when his prayers were answered with the enemy's destruction, Virtue 9. However, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas would achieve his greatest fame through his 11th virtue, his role as the conqueror of Persia. This accomplishment would establish him as one of the most significant military commanders in Islamic history. When Umar ibn al-Khattab assumed the caliphate in 13 AH, his first priority was continuing the governmental system established by Abu Bakr, implementing the Quran and Sunnah as the foundation of Islamic governance. However, Umar's reign would become particularly distinguished for its extensive military expansion, a systematic spread of Islamic influence that represented one of the most successful conquest campaigns in human history. It is crucial to understand that Islamic military doctrine recognized two distinct forms of jihad. The first type is defensive jihad, exemplified by contemporary Muslim defenders in Palestine who fight to protect their homeland from aggression. This form of jihad arises from necessity when Muslims face attack and must defend themselves. The second type, and this aspect has largely disappeared from modern Muslim consciousness, is expansive jihad. This form of warfare does not wait for external aggression, but actively seeks to extend Islamic influence into new territories. Far from being a historical aberration, expansive jihad was the predominant form of military activity during both the Prophet's era and the time of his companions. Under this doctrine, Islamic governments would organize military expeditions specifically designed to offer Islam to non-Muslim regions. The conquered peoples were presented with three options: conversion to Islam, payment of jizya tribute tax, or military conflict. The Quranic verse governing this approach states, "Fight them until they pay the jizya with willing submission and are subdued." Islamic scholars interpreted this to mean that non-Muslims should come before Muslim authorities, saying, "O Muslims, please accept this jizya from us, and do not make war upon us," demonstrating their acknowledgement of Islamic authority. If the offered peoples rejected both Islam and the jizya arrangement, military conquest would follow. This systematic approach to expansion characterized many of the Prophet's own campaigns, including the expedition to Tabuk and various other military operations against neighboring tribes. During Abu Bakr's caliphate, internal consolidation took precedence as various tribal uprisings and false prophets like Musaylimar al-Kazzab required suppression. However, once Umar assumed leadership, the focus shifted decisively toward external expansion. Within months of becoming caliph in the latter half of 13 AH and early 14 AH, Umar organized the first major expansive expedition targeting the northern regions of the Arabian Peninsula, the lands of Sham, Greater Syria. To visualize this geographically, if one imagines the Arabian Peninsula as an outstretched hand, Mecca and Medina occupy positions roughly in the center. The southern regions include Yemen and, extending further, the Indonesian archipelago. The northern territories encompass modern-day Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan. Beyond that lie Turkey to the north, Egypt and North Africa to the west, and Iraq, Iran, and Central Asia to the east. Umar's first campaign targeted these northern Levantine territories with an initial force of approximately 8,000 warriors. This number was specifically chosen with reference to a prophetic hadith concerning military operations. "A force from my Ummah, numbering 12,000, will never be defeated, provided they do not disobey Allah." Since the initial deployment fell short of this prophetically guaranteed minimum, Umar supplemented the force by dispatching 4 additional companions, including Miqdad and several others whom he considered equivalent to 1,000 ordinary fighters each. This brought the total force above the crucial 12,000 warrior threshold. The strategic wisdom of this approach became evident during the famous Battle of Yarmouk, where approximately 8,000 to 12,000 Muslim warriors achieved a decisive victory against a Byzantine force estimated at 250,000 troops. This extraordinary triumph, detailed in previous accounts of Umar's caliphate, involved dramatic scenes of Roman soldiers chaining themselves together to prevent retreat, only to have Muslim champions like Zubair ibn al-Awwam break through their formations and shatter their iron restraints. Following success in the Levant, Amr ibn al-As led 8,000 troops westward to conquer Egypt, thereby opening the entire North African continent to Islamic expansion. These victories would continue under Uthman ibn Affan's caliphate, spreading Islamic influence across vast territories. However, the Eastern Front presented perhaps the greatest challenge. The territories of Iraq, Iran, Russia, and Afghanistan were controlled by the Persian Empire, one of the ancient world's great superpowers. The Persians were renowned for their military prowess, their soldiers typically possessing large, powerful physiques and serving a Zoroastrian fire-worshipping culture that had dominated the region for centuries. The historical context for this confrontation dated back to the Prophet's own lifetime. While still in Mecca, the Prophet had dispatched envoys to various world leaders, including the Persian emperor, inviting them to embrace Islam. The Persian ruler's response had been contemptuous. He tore up the Prophet's letter and ordered the execution of the Muslim messenger. Upon learning of this affront, the Prophet made a prophetic declaration: "He has torn my letter. Allah will tear apart his kingdom." Islamic historians identify this prophetic curse as the spiritual foundation for Persia's eventual destruction. In 14 AH, several months after the victory at Yarmouk, Umar ibn al-Khattab initiated the campaign against Persia by sending letters throughout the Arabian Peninsula, calling for volunteers to join the Eastern Jihad. The response was overwhelming. 30,000 warriors assembled, including both experienced veterans and enthusiastic volunteers who would learn combat skills during the campaign itself. Initially, Umar intended to personally lead this massive expedition. The Caliph departed Medina with the entire force, but after half a day's journey, he called a halt for consultation with his senior advisors. Should I continue to lead this campaign personally against Persia, given that Ali ibn Abi Talib is currently governing Medina in my absence? Umar asked his council, should we proceed as planned, or should I remain in Medina? Most companions encouraged the Caliph's direct participation, viewing it as an honor that could potentially earn him martyrdom, something Umar had often prayed for, requesting Allah to grant him death as a martyr in the city of the Prophet. However, Abdul Rahman ibn Auf offered a dissenting perspective. I personally believe you should remain in Medina and allow us to continue the campaign. If you were to be killed in battle, the Muslim community would face severe disruption. Who could adequately replace you, especially given your successful expansion of Islam into the northern Arabian territories and your proven ability to lead victories with forces exceeding 12,000 warriors? It would be wiser for you to remain in Medina, continuing to direct our operations from there, while appointing someone else to field command. Umar accepted this counsel and began deliberating over the choice of field commander. The Persian campaign demanded exceptional leadership. This was not a mission for ordinary commanders. The Persians were renowned throughout the ancient world as master warriors, typically possessing imposing physical stature and formidable combat skills developed over generations of military tradition. After extensive consultation with various names proposed and rejected, one advisor finally declared, "I have found the perfect candidate." There is no possibility of error with this choice. Who? Umar inquired. The advisor deliberately built suspense, repeating his confident assertion until he had the full attention of Umar and all the assembled companions. Finally, after the third inquiry, he announced his recommendation: Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, the Prophet's own master archer. This selection was immediately recognized as inspired. Saad possessed not only exceptional archery skills, but also an impressively powerful physical build that would command respect even among the imposing Persians. His strategic military mind and proven battlefield experience made him the ideal candidate for such a crucial mission. "You are absolutely correct," Umar confirmed. "Your choice is perfect." At that time, Saad was not present with the expedition, having been assigned by Umar to collect zakat throughout Islamic territories and transport the funds to Medina. Umar immediately dispatched messengers to summon Sa'd to the army's location. When Sa'd arrived, Umar addressed him with the gravity befitting such a momentous appointment. "O Sa'd, I am entrusting you with the liberation of Persia. Conquer them with Allah's permission." Sa'd accepted this tremendous responsibility, understanding that he was being asked to lead 30,000 Muslim warriors against one of history's most formidable empires. The fate of Islamic expansion into the vast eastern territories now rested upon his shoulders, and the master archer who had saved the Prophet at Uhud was about to embark upon his greatest military challenge. This appointment would prove to be one of Umar's most brilliant decisions, as Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas would go on to achieve victories that would permanently alter the balance of power in the ancient world and establish Islamic influence across the vast Persian territories for centuries to come.